June 10, 1991, 11-year-old Jaycee Dugard left her house, walking toward her school bus stop, just like she had done countless times before. She wore her favorite pink outfit and carried her school bag, unaware that these small details would soon become haunting markers of her last known moments of freedom. Within minutes, Jaycee was gone, vanishing without a sound. How could an 11-year-old girl disappear from a peaceful neighborhood without anyone noticing? And how did her captors evade discovery for nearly 2 decades? This is the story of Jaycee Dugard's abduction, the unimaginable years that followed, and her ultimate fight for survival. Before we begin, if you're passionate about true crime stories that uncover the strength of the human spirit, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more real-life cases that deserve to be told. South Lake Tahoe, California. A quiet town nestled against the Sierra Nevada mountains, where tall pines and cool, fresh air define the landscape. In the early 1990s, it was the kind of place where families felt safe, where neighbors knew one another, and where children like 11-year-old Jaycee Dugard could walk to school without fear. It was the beginning of summer, June 10, 1991. The morning sun hung low in the sky, the quiet hum of life waking up in the neighborhood. Birds chirped in the trees, and the occasional car rolled slowly through the streets. Jaycee, an innocent, soft-spoken girl with blonde hair and bright blue eyes, stepped out of her family's home. Dressed in her favorite pink jacket and matching pants, she waved goodbye to her mother, Terry Probin. Terry, a young single mother, worked hard to care for Jaycee and her stepfather, Carl Probin. Like most mothers, she always worried about her child, but this morning, there was no sign of what lay ahead. For Jaycee, it was just a normal walk, a short, familiar route to the school bus stop. The road Jaycee walked was quiet that morning. Not many people were outside yet, and the few houses along the way sat still, their windows reflecting the brightening light. To an outsider, there was nothing unusual about the scene, a little girl walking along a street she'd walked countless times before. But then, a car appeared. It was gray, a dull nondescript sedan. It slowed as it approached. Jaycee didn't know this car. She didn't know its occupants. She felt uneasy as it crept closer, but she had no time to react. The vehicle came to a stop beside her. The passenger door swung open, and before she could step back, a man stepped out. His name would later be known. At that moment, he was just a stranger with a terrifying presence. In his hand was something Jaycee couldn't process, a black device that crackled with energy. She froze. Without warning, the man pressed the stun gun against her small body. The pain shot through her like lightning, and she fell, unable to resist. In those brief moments, seconds that felt endless, she was lifted off the ground and pulled into the car. The man closed the door. His wife sat silently in the driver's seat. Without a word, she stepped on the gas. The car sped off, leaving nothing behind but an empty road. Jaycee's pink backpack, the only trace of her, lay abandoned on the pavement. Back at home, Terry Probin had no idea that her daughter was gone. That moment, those silent minutes as the car disappeared, marked the beginning of a nightmare that would stretch across years. The school bus came and went, its doors closing on an empty space where Jaycee should have stood. By the time anyone noticed she was missing, Jaycee Dugard was already miles away. How could someone vanish in broad daylight, on a route so familiar? How did two people, a man and a woman, manage to take a child without a trace? For her mother, Terry, the realization would be gut-wrenching. The search for Jaycee Dugard would begin quickly. Neighbors, friends, and authorities came together, combing the town, the forests, and nearby roads. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Missing posters were printed and plastered across every surface. The town of South Lake Tahoe, a place where life had always felt safe, was now gripped by fear and confusion. For the man and his wife, however, the car was already far from that quiet road. Hidden behind darkened windows, Jaycee sat in silence, terrified, unable to understand what had just happened. The car turned toward the highway, carrying her farther away with every passing second. Unseen and unheard, Jaycee Dugard was gone. When Jaycee Dugard opened her eyes, she wasn't at home. She wasn't on the street she knew so well or anywhere familiar. The air was damp and heavy. The walls around her were bare, dark, and cold. She was lying on a thin mattress in a small, windowless room, a room that felt like it had no beginning and no end. She tried to move, but her wrists were handcuffed. The metal bit into her skin as she struggled, her heart pounding in her chest. Outside the walls, there was nothing but silence. For an 11-year-old child, the confusion was overwhelming. Hours earlier, she had been walking to her bus stop. Now, she was here, in a place she could not recognize, in the company of people she did not know. Footsteps broke the silence. The sound was distant at first, then closer. Slow, deliberate steps echoed through the stillness. A door creaked open, spilling light into the room, and a man entered. His name was Phillip Garrido, though Jaycee didn't know it yet. He was thin, with deep-set eyes and a presence that made him impossible to ignore. There was something about the way he spoke, his voice shifting between soft reassurance and sharp authority. Phillip told Jaycee that she was safe, but her instincts told her otherwise. He moved carefully as he spoke, watching her every reaction. And when he left, the door locked behind him, sealing her into that cold, dark space once more. Days blurred together. Jaycee didn't know how much time had passed. The only markers of time were the brief moments when Phillip returned, bringing food, talking to her, and making strange claims about voices he said he heard. Voices that, according to him, told him what to do. Jaycee's cries for help went unanswered. When she screamed, there was no response. When she pounded on the walls, no one came. Outside her small prison was a backyard, hidden behind fences and tarps, in a suburban neighborhood in Antioch, California, nearly 200 miles from where she had been taken. The shed where Jaycee was held had been prepared long before she arrived. It was soundproof. It was designed to keep her isolated, unseen, and unheard. When Phillip's wife, Nancy Garrido, entered the room, Jaycee searched her face for kindness, for some sign that this woman might help her. But Nancy said little, her actions cold and detached. Over time, Nancy made Jaycee call her Mom, a name that felt strange and wrong coming from her lips. Phillip, too, demanded to be called Dad. For Jaycee, the world outside those walls was starting to feel like a distant memory. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. The isolation became suffocating. Philip began subjecting Jaycee to unspeakable abuse, moments that a child could neither understand nor escape. When the door opened, Jaycee would hold her breath, unsure of what would come next. She never knew if it would be Philip with his rambling words and unpredictable behavior, or Nancy, watching silently with an unnerving stillness. The backyard where Jaycee was hidden remained shrouded from view, blocked by fences and tents that no one thought to question. The Garrido's neighbors lived just steps away. Families went about their lives, children played outside, and cars came and went. Yet behind those fences, Jaycee's world was shrinking, confined to four walls and the weight of silence. At night, when the world outside fell quiet, Jaycee would listen. 4 footsteps. 4 voices. For any sound that meant someone might be looking for her. But there was only the hum of the night air and the occasional footsteps outside the shed, Philip, making his rounds, ensuring Jaycee was still there. Days turned into years. Jaycee, still a child, tried to adapt to life in captivity, doing whatever she could to survive. The walls around her became her reality. The backyard, a prison hidden in plain sight, became the only world she knew. The voices of her family, the smell of her home, the feeling of freedom, those memories began to fade. For the Garridos, Jaycee was theirs to control, theirs to manipulate. And for years, they succeeded. No one saw her. No one heard her. And no one came. The search for Jaycee Dugard didn't end with the initial efforts. As weeks stretched into months, the community of South Lake Tahoe refused to forget the little girl who had vanished so suddenly. Vigil after vigil was held, candles lit against the growing darkness of uncertainty. Terry Probin became the face of hope and determination. She worked tirelessly, speaking to anyone who would listen, from local law enforcement to national media outlets. Her voice, often trembling with emotion, carried a message that echoed in the hearts of parents everywhere. My daughter is out there. Someone knows where she is. Law enforcement agencies pored over the scant evidence they had. Witnesses described a gray car, but the details were vague, too vague to point to a specific suspect. Investigators looked at known offenders in the area, but each lead ended in frustration. The case grew cold, but it never went away. Phillip Garrido continued to live his life. By all outward appearances, he was an ordinary man with a wife, a home, and a small business making signs. To those who crossed paths with him, he seemed eccentric, yes, but not dangerous. But Philip's past told a different story. In 1976, he had kidnapped a woman, taken her to a storage unit, and assaulted her for hours before being caught. For that crime, he was convicted and sentenced to 50 years in prison. But like so many others, Phillip Garrido didn't serve his full sentence. By the late 1980s, he was out on parole, a free man, living in a neighborhood where no one knew the depths of his depravity. Philip's parole required regular visits from officers, who came to his home to ensure he was complying with the law. What they never noticed, or chose not to investigate, was the backyard. The Garrido's backyard wasn't visible from the street. Fenced off and covered with tarps and tents, it appeared ordinary enough to avoid suspicion. But behind those barriers lay the hidden world where Jaycee was being kept. How did Philip evade detection for so long? Part of the answer lies in his manipulative charm. He knew how to disarm people, how to present himself as harmless. When parole officers came to his home, he met them at the door, steering the conversation away from anything that might raise questions. Philip's behavior in public, however, was another matter entirely. He would often speak in loud, rambling monologues about religion and bizarre inventions. At one point, he claimed he had found a way to control sound waves with his mind. To those who didn't know him, he was just another odd character, a man with strange ideas but no obvious threat. What no one realized was that these public displays were part of a larger pattern. Philip was hiding in plain sight, using his eccentricity as a mask for his crimes. For Jaycee Dugard, life in captivity became a strange and terrible routine. The backyard where she was held was her prison, but it was also the only world she knew. As the years passed, Jaycee gave birth to 2 daughters. Both were fathered by Phillip Garrido, who saw himself as their protector. For Jaycee, raising her children in captivity became her new normal. She did her best to create a life for them within the confines of the backyard. She taught them how to read and write, using scraps of paper and whatever books she could find. She shielded them from the truth about their father, desperate to protect them from the horrors she had endured. But the weight of those years was inescapable. Jaycee watched the world beyond the fences and wondered if anyone was still looking for her. Did her mother still hope? Did her family still remember? Her cries had long since stopped. She knew no one would hear her. For Phillip and Nancy Garrido, the backyard was their secret, a place where they could exert total control over Jaycee's life. They created an elaborate system to keep her hidden, ensuring that no one who visited the property would ever suspect the truth. But the truth, as buried as it seemed, had a way of surfacing. How could such a crime go unnoticed for so many years? What would you do if you were in Jaycee's position, or her mother's? Share your thoughts in the comments below. On August 24, 2009, nearly 18 years since Jaycee Dugard's disappearance, the Garridos arrived at UC Berkeley, where Philip hoped to gain permission to host a religious event on campus. He brought with him 2 young girls, his daughters, born during Jaycee's captivity. Philip's behavior that day drew immediate attention. As he spoke to a campus security officer, his words were disjointed, his thoughts scattered. He rambled about religion, his divine mission, and his ideas for helping others find salvation. But it wasn't just his words that stood out, it was his demeanor. Something about him felt wrong. The officer, suspicious but calm, decided to dig deeper. She asked Philip about the 2 girls. Who were they? Why weren't they in school? His answers were evasive, vague, and only fueled her concern. The officer made a call to Philip's parole officer, urging him to investigate further. That single call would set in motion a chain of events that unraveled a nearly 2-decade-long mystery. Phillip Garrido was summoned for questioning the following day. He arrived at the parole office with Nancy, Jaycee, and the 2 young girls in tow. For investigators, it was a routine check, at least at first. The questioning began with Philip. He spoke in circles, his answers peppered with references to his religious beliefs and his supposed efforts to turn his life around. But the officers were no longer convinced. The 2 girls, sitting quietly nearby, caught the officers' attention. They seemed withdrawn, nervous, as though they had never been in such a setting before. Their appearance and demeanor raised even more questions. Finally, it was Jaycee's turn to speak. The officers asked her name. At first, she hesitated, glancing at Phillip and Nancy. For years, they had controlled her every move, every word. But now, with the walls closing in, she made a decision that would change everything. In a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I'm Jaycee Dugard." The room fell silent. The officers stared at her in shock. Could it really be true? Could the missing girl from 1991, the girl whose face had been on posters, whose name had haunted investigators for nearly 2 decades, be sitting in front of them? Jaycee's confession broke the case wide open. Parole officers immediately arrested Phillip and Nancy Garrido. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, the unimaginable truth came to light. Jaycee Dugard had been living in the Garrido's backyard for 18 years. She had been held captive, isolated from the world, forced to endure unimaginable suffering. And yet, she had survived. Word of Jaycee's discovery spread quickly. Her family, who had spent nearly 2 decades clinging to hope, was notified. Terry Probin, her mother, received the call she had been praying for all these years. "We've found Jaycee. She's alive." When Terry and Jaycee were reunited, the moment was overwhelming. Years of anguish, grief, and unanswered questions gave way to tears of joy and disbelief. Terry hugged her daughter tightly, unable to let go, as though afraid it might all be a dream. But it was also bittersweet. The years they had lost could never be returned. Jaycee's daughters, who had grown up in captivity, now faced the daunting task of adjusting to a world they had never known. The arrest of Phillip and Nancy Garrido marked the end of an 18-year nightmare for Jaycee Dugard, but it also revealed the many failures that allowed such a horror to persist for so long. Phillip Garrido and his wife were immediately charged with a multitude of crimes, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, and years of abuse. The trial, which began shortly after their arrest, was swift and decisive. The evidence against them was overwhelming, from Jaycee's testimony to the discovery of the hidden backyard compound where she and her daughters had been held. In court, Phillip Garrido showed little remorse, continuing to ramble about his religious visions, and claiming that he had been reformed by holding Jaycee captive. Nancy, meanwhile, attempted to shift the blame, portraying herself as a bystander to her husband's actions. The judge was unmoved. Phillip Garrido was sentenced to 431 years to life in prison, ensuring he would never walk free again. Nancy Garrido received a sentence of 36 years to life, making it unlikely she would ever leave prison. For both, their lives of secrecy and control came to a definitive end. For Jaycee, freedom was a complex and overwhelming experience. The world she returned to in 2009 was vastly different from the one she had known in 1991. Technology had advanced, her childhood friends had grown up, and her family had spent nearly 2 decades grieving her loss. But Jaycee was determined not to let her past define her future. Jaycee poured her experiences into writing, eventually publishing her memoir, A Stolen Life, in 2011. The book became a bestseller, offering readers a raw and unflinching look at her years in captivity. Through her words, Jaycee shed light on the horrors she endured, but also on the strength and resilience that helped her survive. She founded the Jaycee Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families recover from trauma. Through her work, she became an advocate for other survivors, using her story to inspire hope and change. If you found this story as powerful as we did, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on more true crime documentaries. We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts on this case in the comments below, and let us know which other stories you'd like us to cover. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.